Hello, this is Surya Silva speaking, welcoming you back to Life Beyond Limits for Women. This is Module 4 and Lesson 1. In this module, we're looking at befriending fear and finding courage. And in the first lesson, we'll discuss how fear can be such a limiting factor in your life and how you can learn to manage this emotion. In the last module, we explored what the mind can conceive and believe it will achieve. You began to train your mind to hold a clear vision of your life beyond limits. Now we move forward to the next chapter, building onto the previous ones. I'd like to begin with a story from my own life that illustrates fear and the impact it can have. A few years ago, a friend and I were travelling to a place in Australia to see these beautiful mountains that are on the image on your screen. We had to travel about 10 hours to get there, and by the time we arrived, we were very excited. Once we did arrive, we learned that the mountains are honeycomb, very soft and fragile because they're millions of years old. That means you can only walk around the bottom of them, and so it's quite difficult to see the majesty of the entire mountain range. A very enterprising company had set up helicopter rides to address this issue. My friend and I agreed that we would take one of the rides. When we walked towards the helicopter, I saw that it was really quite small, and it had no doors or windows on the side. A bit like those ones that you see in the movies with someone hanging out the side of it, or a photographer taking many beautiful images. This is what we were going in. We're strapped in, and the pilot starts to take off. The moment we left the ground, my stomach rose up to my throat, and I went into absolute fear. I was saying to the pilot, "I can't do this. It's too terrifying. Just take us back down." I absolutely can't do it. My friend was saying, "It's going to be fine, Surya. It'll be really beautiful. Look what we'll see." And the pilot was saying, "It's all good. You'll enjoy it." I didn't enjoy it. I was hanging onto the side of the seat with one hand, and my knuckles were white with gripping so hard. With the other hand, I was hanging onto the side of the helicopter on the outside of it, where a door or a window might have been. I'm now rigid with fear. I've become completely paralyzed. My body is rigid, my mind is rigid, and I'm unable to think. In the back of the helicopter, my friend is jumping from side to side, taking hundreds of fabulous photographs. I'm sitting there, unable to move. Obviously, I didn't take any photos. By now, I can't even speak. All this time, I have thoughts running around, "I'm going to fall out and die." Obviously, I didn't fall out and I didn't die, and yet the fear had completely overtaken my mind. When we landed eventually, and I crawled out of that helicopter, I was shaking with all the terror that had to come out of my body. I said to my friend, "I just couldn't think of what to do." I was so paralyzed with the fear that I was going to fall out and die. And yet I have all these techniques that I could have used. I could have breathed into my body and relaxed it. I could have breathed into my mind and let go of some of the fear. I could have kept reinforcing to myself that I was safe. And yet none of that was possible because the fear had taken over. It was very unpleasant. Have you ever had an experience like this, where fear has absolutely embraced and encapsulated you, and you're unable to move forward? It's not something I'd recommend. Coming into present time, fear is so normal for all of us. Every single person has fear. It often sits under other emotions. Sometimes when we're angry, we're fearful behind it. Or perhaps other emotions camouflage the fear. By learning to work with the fear, you give yourself a great gift of moving much closer to your own truth. And you have to learn how to process it for yourself and avoid it becoming a limitation or a block, as in the example that I just gave you. You see, most of us are in a trance in life. Fear keeps you in that trance. You're not awake, and instead you're asleep at the wheel of your life. It feels so normal because it's so familiar. Susan Jeffers said in her very famous book, "We can feel the fear and do it anyway." That's become a slogan now, and I think that's absolutely fantastic. In order to move out of the trance, it's important that you are awake, because when fear is ignored, you're unable to be aware of what's happening within you. The same old movies play in your mind, and the same old thoughts go round and around, as we talked about earlier. And this keeps you on a merry-go-round. You're on this Ferris wheel going around and around, and it's difficult then to break the habit. One way that you can do is to think about women you know who have overcome fear in her life. Who do you know who's been able to do something wonderful in spite of the fear? Oprah Winfrey is a marvelous example for me. A woman born into really tough circumstances. She went on to create a highly successful television empire and was able to motivate and inspire literally thousands of people who watched her program. I have a friend who, in spite of living with a severe disability, she's created many successful businesses. She lives in a loving relationship, she has children, and she showers the world with love and kindness. She's such an inspiration and a role model. So who inspires you? Who has overcome fear and has learnt to live in their own greatness? What qualities do they have that you would like for yourself? You can tap into those qualities, the ones that they use to overcome their fear, and take them on for yourself. That's not to tap into their personality or their characteristics. It's simply to understand the qualities that they're using and start to imbibe them for yourself. The research says, and has identified, at least 50 different types of fear. I've put up some of the most common ones here for you. Fear of failure and fear of success. These are huge ones in our society. If I don't do this, what will happen? If I do it, what will happen? The fear of not being good enough or not being lovable. Fear of being old and alone. No one wants that. Fear of not getting it right. And then, of course, we become a perfectionist. Fear of rejection, of running out of time. Fear of the unknown. That's very common for many, many people. Or fear of what others will say. Can you relate to any of these? They're common for most of us. And as I said, your task is to learn to see what happens in your body and how you can manage fear in a more productive way. In addition, we have the language barriers that we talked about in the last module. The words should, shouldn't, can't, must, have to, won't. The words can't and won't. They're words that you need to eliminate from your vocabulary. They're negative words. They reinforce a negative self-talk. Sometimes as well, we allow past experiences of something that didn't go as well as we wanted it to go to influence current decision-making. Or perhaps you make up stories and stick to them. And we teach ourselves by reinforcing the story over and over in our mind that the story is true, even though it probably isn't. Or perhaps you procrastinate out of fear. And we all know that one. Fear obviously begins with your thoughts. And the thoughts are the basis for the stories that you tell yourself, the habits that you get into with the fear and the story. Remember that programming comes from the subconscious mind. The stories are usually outdated and very limiting, and yet they impact on your actions and behaviors. It's very true that fear is all around us. So many of the fears are conditioned into you when you're young. In addition, our society conditions all of us to be fearful. The media is full of bad news stories. Rarely do you see a good news story. Bad news stories reinforce fear, reinforce being really careful in life and not taking too many risks because it isn't going to work out. And when something is repeated over and over, whether it's a story in our society and from the media or something that you keep telling yourself, and you hear it so many times, you start to believe it as being real. Susan Jeff has also said that we've been taught to believe that the negative equals realistic and the positive equals unrealistic. That means that if we stay in the negative, the fear and the trance, that's the reality of life. And if we move out of it, then we're being unrealistic. That's quite scary in itself. And it's a great example of the environmental fears that are part of the external conditioning. Of course, staying in that place, negative equals realistic, is how the limitations are reinforced. You see, nothing in life is either good or bad. It's the meaning that you give to it that's important. And we're going to discuss this topic a lot further in the next lesson. I'll leave you to reflect on that for now, and I look forward to seeing you in the next session. Bye for now.